Good morning. I'm Beverly Ross, and I'm a very grateful Al-Anon from Fort Worth, Texas. I do like cats. I hadn't thought of myself as a cat person. I love cats. I also love alcoholics, and I also love teenagers, and I think they have a great deal in common. We were just talking this morning, none of them mind, you know. That's the problem. Rusty came down a few minutes ago and asked me what I wanted her to say about me, and that was awesome, you know, and I said, well, just remember, I'm going to be introducing you this afternoon. So some of that lovely tribute will be made back this afternoon, and God, then I remembered she spoke after I did, so she really is going to get the last word. I have so much to be grateful for, and I do want to thank Cheryl for just being an incredibly wonderful hostess, and she has just gone far beyond what most people do to make me feel make me feel the kind of warmth that Minnesota exudes for me. The first time I ever came near the program, I went to a conference, and it was in Longview, Texas, and I spoke up here 5 years ago at the Al-Anon State Convention, and I told this, but it's really the way I think God weaves our lives together. At that conference was Bob B., and he spoke, and I got to hear him, and David A., who was also, I think, instrumental in the starting of this, from Dallas, also spoke, and his wife was the first Al-Anon I ever heard speak. So I always feel like it's sort of like, you know, when you get up here, it's not what you choose to do. You know, I was thinking, as they said, the Serenity Prayer, I was thinking, well, you know, I have choices. You know, I can't change. I'm up here, but I could walk off. You know? And then the wisdom to know the difference is I can't do that. I have to stay here, and I need to be honest with you. I was told early on that I had to be very careful when I got up at the podium because I was playing with people's heads, and I need to be totally honest. And I loved what Martha said last night. That anybody that is going to be totally honest for 1 hour goes into total terror, because it certainly didn't come easy to me, honestly. I want to tell you that in Texas they tell a lot of Al-Anon jokes, and they probably tell them up here. Some places they don't. But, you know, they tell the joke about why the Al-Anon makes love with her eyes closed because she can't stand to see an AA enjoying himself, you know, and things like that. And so I have to tell you my Al-Anon joke, which really is a true story, and my husband always makes me tell this because it did happen to us, and I had never heard of Al-Anon. I had never heard of Al-Anon in my whole life. I'd heard of AA, but I'd never heard of Al-Anon, and we took a trip after we were in the program a very short time, and Buddy decided we were going to go to the Virgin Islands. Now, we had not been to Granbury, which is down the road from Fort Worth, because we didn't have enough money to go there, but suddenly we are going to the Virgin Islands, and I just didn't ask how, you know. But we're going to take this lovely trip, and so he got the airplane tickets, and in his own inimitable way, he put me up 3 or 4 rows from him, and so we had these 2 seats, but we weren't sitting together. And when the little girl came down the aisle, and she is going, coffee, tea, or do you want a drink? Coffee, tea, or do you want a drink? I thought, well, he can handle that, you know, and so they got back to him, and coffee, tea, or do you want a drink? And he looked up and he said, oh, I don't want a drink. I drank my way into Alcoholics Anonymous. And she went, you're in Alcoholics Anonymous? And he said, yes. And she said, well, tell me about it. Well, with that, he was off and running, and he took her through all the bars, all the drinking. She quit serving drinks. People in the row ahead of them got up on their knees and leaned over to listen to what, you know, he was saying. People in the back of the plane were saying, back here for the drinks, back here with the drinks. And about halfway back they were saying, there's an alcoholic in the front of the plane, you know. And it was the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me. And I was sitting there thinking, what happened to anonymity? What happened to anonymity? And I thought, I'm not even going to look back because they don't know I'm with him. And so in a few minutes, he ended his little talk by saying, but if you really want the other side of the story, you need to ask my wife, Beverly. She's 3 rows up there reading the magazine. Well, we got down to the Virgin Islands, and there had been a lawyer sitting next to Buddy, a lawyer from Dallas, Texas, and he had been fascinated with the story, and so he recognized me down on the beach, and he came up and he said, "You're Beverly?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, tell me all about alcoholism and what it was like living with an alcoholic." Well, of course, all these people on the beach, I felt like kind of scooted over, and so I very quickly went through. He'd heard the whole story, but I just went through a few little things, tried to get him off my back, and I got to the point where I said, I joined Al-Anon. And he said, "You can't join Al-Anon." "What do you mean, join Al-Anon?" In a very intimidating voice. And I said, "Of course you can join Al-Anon." I joined Al-Anon, and he said, "Well, what's Al-Anon?" And I said, "Well, Al-Anon is for the family and friends of alcoholics." And he said, "My God, I have been an assistant district attorney. I have sentenced people to jail for alcoholism. We have sent them to AA for their alcoholism, and until this moment, I thought Al-Anon was the pill they gave AAs to keep them sober." So it's sort of like we were a living joke during that period. Anyway, we have had an incredible life and since coming to you all, and I want to start with something that happened to us sort of at the end of our time, 10 years into our program, because it was such a monumental thing for us to have happen, and it actually happened on my 10th Al-Anon birthday. There were 5 groups that were chosen originally from AAs mainly to go into the Soviet Union at Gorbachev's invitation. And we were in the 3rd group, and I was in the 1st group that had Al-Anon. And it was just an awesome experience. There is just no way that I can tell you what it was like. But I want to share because I feel it was a gift you all gave to us, and it impacted our lives. And so I want to just briefly, in about 5 minutes, tell you what it was like. We flew in with these other people that we didn't know at all, and we met in Helsinki, Finland, and we went on into the Soviet Union. And this was 3 years ago when glasnost was very new, and people didn't really believe, in Texas at least, that glasnost was real, that it was all a fraud. And it was frightening in a way to go into a country like that, because the people in Finland told us, it was kind of like we would describe Cuba down in Texas, where you're going through and it'll be a whole different life, and it was. It changed our lives in a great deal. The first day we went into Tartu, which is in Estonia, and we went to a church. The churches are packed in Russia. God is alive and well in the Soviet Union. And in this church, the minister preached on the seeds of faith, the seeds that fall on fallow soil and the seeds that fall on fertile soil. And it was very moving, and they had a translator for us, and then we all stood up and sang, and they sang Amazing Grace and Rock of Ages, and everybody in our 20 in our group just wept, and it was just very moving. And when we got outside, one of the ladies, they had told us to bring in a lot of gifts, because the Russians give you things. They'll give you something, then you give them something, then they give you something. Finally, they'll take a picture off the wall of their home and give it to you. It is just, they're very, very generous. And so she had these little seeds, and they were seeds that had little burpee seeds, and on the back they said, "We bring you seeds of love and peace and sobriety." And it was written in Russian. And so she handed them these 3 packages of seeds, 3 of the ladies in the church. And they ran back and got everybody in the church. There were about 200 people, and they lined up, and she broke the little seeds open and put 3 little seeds, they were chrysanthemum seeds, in everybody's hand, and they all cried. And it was a very moving thing. Later we found out that flowers are the only thing you can grow in the Soviet Union and keep the money for if you're an individual. And it was a very precious moment for us. In Leningrad, they were teaching us to ride the subways, because that's the way we handed out the materials. And so that night they were trying to show us, and a whole group of people, of course about 1 million people, were pouring this way on the subway. And suddenly this man was coming the other way upstream, because he had seen us wearing these badges, these yellow badges. And each group had worn these badges in, and they said sobriety and 1 day at a time, written in Russian. And so we had these big yellow badges on, and so he was going, "Sarah, Sarah, Sarah," running toward us, and none of us were named Sarah, but we stopped. He got to us. Well, Sarah had led the first group in, and he just wept when he saw us. It just was the most emotional thing, and he said, I want to tell you, I have been sober since the first group came in, and I never thought I would ever live to see another member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have kept another man sober and another man. And, of course, the AAs were just overcome. And we'd break into little groups at night and go out and carry the message. And so 3 of them or 4 of them said they'd meet him at the station, and they'd go eat, and they did. And while he was there talking to him, they recorded what he was saying. And he had had a spiritual experience as a result of the steps, and he had even joined a church in Russia, and he was telling them all of his story and weeping, and they were weeping. And suddenly the lady who was the manager of the restaurant asked them to leave, and she said to them, you're talking in an anti-Soviet manner, you're talking to Americans, you're talking about religion, get out of the restaurant. So they went out on the porch and finished what they were doing, and the next day he came to the hotel and told us that he had lost his job as a result of that. And we cried, and he looked at us and said, it doesn't matter, because I will find another job. But if it had not been for you all, I would be dead if it was not for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had to think that it was quite moving to me, because when I came to the program, I was given a big book because I didn't want to join Al-Anon, and I wanted to be an AA, and so they finally gave me a book and told me to cross out every place that said alcoholic and put my name, and it would fit, and it did. And so when I sponsor people, I always have them buy the big book, and I have them do what was done for me in the manner that I was sponsored. But I always particularly have them read the chapter, if they are married or have a relationship at that time with an alcoholic, to the wives and the family afterward, and the doctor's opinion. And in that book, it says, wife or no wife, job or no job, your sobriety comes first. And those were the hardest words I ever heard. I hated that. I hated those words out of the big book, because wife or no wife was not the way I looked at myself. I was supreme, the supreme being in Buddy Ross's life. And there was not room for God. There certainly wasn't room for AA. And so anyway, I would have them read that over and over to me till they understood the sobriety came first. And in the Soviet Union, that's the way it is. Wife or no wife, job or no job. And it cost him his job. And so what that message to me was the precious gift we are given in this country, that it doesn't cost us our jobs. Sobriety and serenity and these programs don't have to cost us our jobs. They give us the life and the new freedoms that this conference is talking about. We would ride the subways at night, and they'd break us into little groups of 3 or 4, and the 2 other Al-Anons and I, they assigned to the person that took us in, the leader of the group, who was a very beautiful AA woman named Mary from California, and she had been in on the earlier groups, one of the earlier groups, so she led our group in, and she had 14 years sobriety, and she was very buxom, and she wore jogging suits, and she had a great big 14 in gold that hung between her bosoms, and so she would get on the subway, and she would look to one side, and then she'd look to the other side, and I don't know how she'd pick them out, but she would naturally knew which one needed the alcoholic message, and she would turn around and she'd say, Menage with Mary, 14 years, and all the Russians who are very quiet on public, they would look to see what was 14 years old on her bosoms, and then she would say, Niet vodka, Niet champagne, Niet vino, and when she'd say Niet vino, all the Russians say, Niet vino, and then the 2 other Al-Anons and I would jump up and hand out the material up and down the things, And Buddy Ross always said that we looked like Diana Ross and the Supremes, and it just mortified him, and he wouldn't ride on the subway, but with us. But it was a very, very moving experience, and it certainly impacted and changed our life. And if you ever have any extra prayers, do pray for those people who were totally cut off and now are not so cut off, but who do not have the gifts that we have in this country. I still hear from the Al-Anons that I want you to understand, we were not like Bill and Bob going in setting up groups. What we did was go in and tell them what they could do to contact the World Service offices and things and get it started for them and get the translations and things started for them to see if it was applicable. And I will say that in Leningrad, the June after we were there in April, they had their first Russian AA meeting, and And as I said, I hear from the Al-Anon. I got chocolates and a calendar this last year, and it's just, when you say it's a worldwide fellowship, it really impacted me knowing it is really a worldwide fellowship. And I'm a big believer today that if peace comes to the world, it will come through the 12 steps that Alcoholics Anonymous was so wonderful to give to the world. I do want to qualify, as Martha said last night, we always qualify in Texas, and I want to say that I am a member in good standing of the Rivercrest Al-Anon group. I attend 4 to 5 meetings a week, and I go to a conference every weekend almost. I love Al-Anon. It is absolutely, husband or no husband, job or no job, with me, because it is imperative to me that I remember where my sanity came from. Because just like that, I could lose it again. I have the same character defects in certain ways that will recur if I do not stay with my spiritual life. And I know that very, very deeply, that every aspect of my life is based upon my spiritual recovery. And so I will tell you where I came from. I was born and reared in Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud to be a woman from Texas, and I love the state and I love the people there. And I think they're very unique and very wonderful. I was born and reared, wedded and bedded in about 3 blocks. Every member of our family lives within that 3 or 4 blocks, and when the leaves fall, we can all see each other's homes. I don't know it was horrible when Buddy was drinking. It's all right today. My father, I was a Depression baby, and my dad was head of an oil company. And it wasn't that we were so rich, but that the country was very poor. It was a German household. My maiden name was Jaeger, and I never hesitate to say that because they were very opposed to my coming into Al-Anon. So I have spread their name about the world, And I always say my talk deals with sex, God, and money, and not necessarily in that order of importance. But my father was the god of our household. He was a geologist. He was very, very successful, and he was very wonderful. I was my daddy's girl. Like Martha was talking about last night. I was the first child. And I had wonderful values given me in that home. And in Texas, they talk about getting the blessing. And the blessing was that I was born into a household where there was no alcoholism. And they loved me just because I was their child, and they made me feel that I could accomplish and do. And there was a measure. I certainly would never say there was unconditional love, because but there was a measure of unconditional love there, just that I was their child. But there were a lot of conditions, and I was programmed to be an achiever and to show that what I could do. And I got a lot of feeling. I heard one time they said that I came to realize that my last name meant a lot, and my first name didn't mean that much. And so I spent a lot of time, even to this day, of being on my checks carrying my maiden name. And I was thinking about that. Just we have to look at those things in our life, and that probably is a character defect I am still carrying. But if you didn't get the blessing in your first household, the joy is you can get it now, and you can get it in this program. Because in the AA Al-Anon world, you will be blessed beyond all ideas, far beyond anything that could have been given you in your first home, because you will receive unconditional love. And that just is not a commodity that's out there in the world, I don't think, very much. So I really got a double blessing, and I'm grateful for that. I grew up in this household, and I remember when I was about 12 years old, I realized that there was some subject out there I didn't know anything about, and it was sex. And the little girls and boys were talking about it at school. Today, I know 12 years old is pretty late to know about sex, but that was just the way it was for me. And we lived in an area where there were not a lot of kids, and I didn't have anybody to ask. I would have never asked my parents. The German Shepherd dog didn't talk, and I'd had a German nurse. She was gone. So I went where I was to go all of my life. I started to read for answers. I started to read. I can't even remember a time in my life I couldn't read. My mother taught me to read very early. And I think I was born with a Fort Worth Public Library card in my hand. And so when I was 12 years old, I got a basket, went to the public library, and asked for all their books on sex. And they were shocked and wouldn't give them to me. And I thought, well, I'm going off I went for 8 years to Wisconsin, to a camp out of Delafield, Wisconsin, called Nagelwicka. And it was an 8-week camp. And I thought, I was 12, and I thought, now this summer I'll be going back to camp, and there are a lot of older women there that could tell me about this, 13, 14, 15 years old. So I bought a great big notebook with 280 pages in it, tied a pencil on it, put my name, address, and telephone number in the front, and set off for Wisconsin. And the first night they started telling jokes, and I just picked up my book, and I took my pen and I started copying everything they said down. Now, I did not understand anything that was in that joke. I didn't understand the language. I didn't understand the vocabulary. So I started copying it down. It's all I can do now, not to look at the interpreter. But anyway, most of the jokes had to do with the farmer's daughter and the traveling salesman, and they did this and they did that. And when they did this, I didn't understand what this was, and it was the F word. So I had to have a vocabulary list. So I wrote that word, and then I said, what does that mean? And they told me, and I put it down, and I thought, oh my gosh, put that down. And the second word I didn't know was SCRE, so forth, and I put that, and I put same as above, And so I had my little vocabulary list to study. And I filled that book up with jokes and with vocabulary words. And I thought, when I get back to Texas, I will study that. And when I go back to school, I will know everything there is to know about sex. And I was so secure with that book. I mean, it was my security blanket. And I just held on to it. Now, the other kids thought I was weird, because... But anyway, at camp, they didn't give you time to study sex, so I was really busy doing all these other things. But I kept thinking, I've got my book, and I'll know by fall everything there's to know. I got home, I jumped off the train, and I suddenly looked around and realized I had left that book on the Santa Fe Chief. And with my name, address, and telephone number was going down. And that's the way it was till I got to you. I think I'd get it all together, and then I'd lose it. So... unfortunately, that next year, I was to meet the man that I have loved all the rest of my life. I took one look at him. I had never had a date. I hadn't even been through puberty. I was straight up and down as a little string. I had gold glasses and little silver teeth with braces on it, and on my teeth. And I looked over, and I saw this young man, and to me, he had everything that I would ever want in my life, and that is the way I still feel today. He became my great obsession. He didn't know it. He was standing over there. He was a freshman in college. He'd been in Kemper Military School, and he had a military uniform on, and all of that was wonderful. But the thing he really had that just absolutely was the piece de resistance was that he had a yellow Chrysler convertible with flat upholstery and white balloon tires, and that was it. I mean, it was it forever. And so upon that great studied moment, I made a life decision, and he didn't know he was going to be the father of my 4 children. He didn't know that he was going to live all the rest of his life with me. But you know how we are when we're in pre-Al-Anonism. I mean, that was it. It was all over. I didn't have to look anymore. I had this horrible problem. I didn't know anything about sex, see, and I thought, oh, my God, I've lost the book now. Now I really need the book, Well, he came home in June, right before I went back to this camp, and, of course, I couldn't date or anything. I mean, that was beyond even thought back then that I would be able to have a date, but I could date when he came home, and I had a date with him, and then he came down and put me on the train to go back to this camp. And that summer, I had the most incredibly wonderful thing happen to me, and that, I like to say, I was blessed by the chest fairy. And what happened was, I gained about 20 pounds, and I gained it all up here. And I had gone off to camp in no bra, no need for a bra, and suddenly it would be rest. We had to go rest every afternoon, and I would lie there and watch them grow. And they'd just coming up like this. And I was in utter terror, that they wouldn't stop. I mean, that they would just... And it was an awesome moment, but anyway, they took me down to Chicago and trussed me up in this big bra, and I was trying to learn how to stand up, and I had these high heels, for my very first high heels, and I was trying to learn how to walk on these high heels and handle this front. And at that moment, like something out of the blue, I just became religious, and I joined the Episcopal Church, and I went racing down to the bookstore, and I bought this giant cross, and I like to say it went nipple to nipple, shine, on my front. God forbid you miss, I am now a Christian. So I go forth, back to Fort Worth, Texas at the end of this growth spurt, and I am practicing how to walk. I have my sweater that I took off to camp with me, which now is dramatic looking, And I'm going to wear the sweater when I get off, and I'm going to wear the high heels, and I'm going to wear the cross, and is he going to be impressed? And so I remember the Santa Fe chief came in and I swung off the train and I turned sideways, you see, so he could get the full view of everything that was there. And I remember he went, "Oh my God," like that, he saw me. And I knew I had him. My mother cried. We were in big trouble. He went off to be a pilot, and he was a 19-year-old pilot in World War II, and was flying bombers. And I went on and grew up during that period, and went off to the University of Texas. And the first thing I did when I checked in was I said, "Where are your sex books?" And they said, "Right down there," because the war was going to be over immediately, was over, and he was going to be coming home, and I had to know everything there was to know. So I grabbed the sex book and I started reading this book, and I read it for 4 years, and I underlined it. It was a medical textbook. I had to go back and get a medical dictionary to understand what they were saying. I became so versed in what was going on, with these medical terms and everything. I was just this expert with no lab experience, but I knew it all up here. Well, anyway, he came back and we married, and the morning after we married, it's just, to me, it's such a wonderful classic pre-Al-Anon statement. We had just had our wedding night. And I turned around to him and I said, "I want to tell you that on page 3, it said that you are supposed," and he said, "Page 3 of what?" And so I got up and I jumped up. I was so proud, and I got my little sex book out, that was just now limp, like one of those Bibles they wave on television, And I opened it up, and he opened it up and just fell on the floor in laughter because it was published in 1917. Well, with that great basis, we set out. I could make scrambled eggs and make fudge. That was the extent of my culinary skills and the way I had been trained. I don't know who thought, my parents thought I was going to marry, but anyway, so with my sex book and my culinary skills, we married. And actually, we had a pretty happy life, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to look back. It's hard. It's like I'm looking back and seeing somebody totally different from the person that I am today. But I was very much in love, and I think he was too. And we had 4 wonderful children that I hope I will have a moment to tell you how they have turned out, because they have been a great blessing to our life through this program. Anyway, I wasn't grateful for those children. I just thought, you have 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, and they were all darling and precious, and they minded pretty well. And that was always very important to me. The one that didn't mind was Buddy Ross. And we were literally drowning in alcoholism, and I had no idea that was what was wrong in our life. I could have told you 1,000 things that were wrong, but it had nothing to do with alcoholism. Now, he drank too much, and I told him all the time how much he drank, and how he shouldn't drink that much, and so forth and so on. I'm going to run through a day and a night in our life, and you can, multiply that during probably the last 3 or 4 years of what Buddy calls his kamikaze drinking. I would get up in the morning, and I would get him up, and then he would run in the bathroom and throw up. Now, he had gotten to the point, he took one look at me, and it was like Pavlov's dogs. He just threw up. He would get to the bathroom, he would throw up. I would go in the bathroom, and I would clean him up. And I would put on his shirt, and I would put on his pants. I would tell him all this time that if he didn't smoke, he wouldn't throw up in the morning. And so I would take his shirt off, and I would clean him up, and I'd put his shirt on, then I'd put his pants, his underpants on, then I'd put his pants on, and then I would zip him up, and then he would scream, and I didn't care. And he often said it's a wonder there was any sex left by the time we got to the program. And that I am the only woman he knows who uses a zipper as a weapon, But anyway, so he would hobble out to the car, and then I would let the children out, and I would go call the 4 children. I don't remember feeding them the last 4 years, but I think I must have. They all survived. And I would get them out and say, out to the driveway, and we'd all get out on the driveway, and then he would get in this big 9-passenger station wagon that was just dying of alcoholic rash. It had been dented and beaten, and, it was just rusting up the sides. And when it stopped, it'd go, like that. Well, he'd get in behind the wheel like this, and I would get the children out there, and we would all be waving to them and saying, goodbye, Daddy, have a great day at work, Daddy. Now, Daddy didn't have a job. But But it was very important that he back the car out and be gone from 9 to 5 so that the neighbors wouldn't know that he didn't have a job. It didn't matter that he didn't have a job, but they mustn't know he didn't have a job. So he would back, he didn't know why he was having to leave either, you see. And the children didn't know why he was having to leave either. Only I knew why he had to leave, you see. So he would back the car out, then I would get all the kids, and I would stuff them into this little tiny black Volkswagen with a little bitty mirror in the back of it. There were 4 kids, and I was a good mother, and I would circle around the neighborhood picking up all the other children that needed to go to school, and we looked like little clowns, you know, with their heads just stuffed in this teeny little car. In California, somebody said to me, "Why didn't you take the big car and give him the little Volkswagen?" That never occurred to me. Never. Clear into Al-Anon. It never occurred to me to switch cars. Anyway, we would start approaching. These kids would be, you know, all ages. My kids are 14 years spread out. And we'd be approaching the elementary school, and the older kids would start saying, "Jump, jump, jump," because I didn't stop. I just roared right, you know, I'd slow down, and they could jump out. We'd get to junior high, and they'd say the same thing, and then we'd get into the high school, and we would all jump out of the car, and I'm not serious. I love teenagers. I adore them. I think they are the cutest things in this world outside of alcoholics and cats. And so anyway, I would go into my classroom, and here they were, you know, 35 kids all scrubbed and just looked darling, and I didn't have to, you know, clean them up, zip them up, or anything. You know, they were all waiting for me. And I was head of the English department in this high school, and I taught British literature. And so I can remember one morning I quoted a lot of poetry. I love poetry. And, you know, you can really get into it. And, I was walking back and forth, and I was beating my breast, and I was going, "What can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and something loitering? What can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and loitering? The sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing." And I would cry. And this big old football boy on the front row said, "It just doesn't grab me like it grabs her." The minute the bell would ring, I would race home at the end of the first period, because I always kept second period free, so I could go home and check on him. And so, I couldn't do that every day, but I did it was able to do it 2 or 3 days out of the 5, and I would race home. Now, this time, he would have wobbled. He really didn't have any place to go. I'd given him a library card and told him he was to spend the day at the public library. You know, I didn't think anybody I knew would see him there, and that was someplace he'd be out of the way, and he might find, God hoping, some book or something. It would start him on some career, you see. And so, anyway, I would go driving home. I'd drive up in the carport. I would see his car. He would have wobbled around the park and gotten back in bed. I would run in the house, kick the door open. He would be lying there with a vodka bottle back in his pajamas, and I would scream, "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" And I would jerk the vodka bottle out of his hand. I'd throw it across the room. He would take one look at me, run in the bathroom, throw up. We'd start going through the thing again. And I would be telling him how ridiculous it was that he smoked like he did, and I would be putting his, dressing him, zip him up. He'd scream, I'd laugh, He'd hobble back to the driveway, get in the car, and off he would go. Well, I would now follow him to make sure that he went to the public library, and then I'd wave to him and smile, blow him a kiss, and go back to Arlington Heights High School. Now, after a year or two, I became very sadistic, amazing. And I started letting him think he had escaped. And we were then like a cat and a mouse. He would drive, and he would look like this to see if I was up the street or any place, and I would be hanging back there watching him, and he would start smiling, and that was just like a rasp rubbing on me. And he would then turn the car to go to this Andy Cap's bar, which was about 3 blocks from our house. And at that point, I would floorboard this Volkswagen, pedal to the metal. I would roar that car and ram him just as hard as I could before he got to the parking lot. And his head, I'd hit him, and his head would, do like that. And I would lean out of that car, and I would say, "You get to the public library," All of this happened within 2 or 3 blocks of our home. And when we got to this program, every person in the Rivercrest Monticello area thought I was the alcoholic. none of them could believe it was that sweet Buddy Ross. Well, we were dysfunctional. I had read this book by Mary Bella Morgan called The Total Woman. And in this book, she gives you little tips for progress in your marriage, like wrap yourself in saran and meet your husband at the door. I couldn't figure out how to do that with 4 children, but one of the things she said, other than have sex every night, was that the man that drank at home did not drink in bars. So I bought a bar, and I bought a shaker, and I bought a little apron that said bottoms up, and I got an hors d'oeuvre tray, and I got a book that taught me to mix drinks, and I started on page 1, and whatever day of the month it was, that was page 15 was for the 15th day of the month. Today we'd be drinking on page 27. And this was a variety of drinks like Between the Sheets and I don't know, Brandy Alexander's. I mean, and I like drinks that had, something to them, like cream and sugar and fruit and little parasols and things. He didn't drink like that. But anyway, and this book said you could have 2 drinks before dinner, and that was what, that was fine. It relaxed you. So I would race home, and right at 5 o'clock, the doorbell would ring. And I would go to the door and say, "Who is it?" And he would say, "It's me." And I would say, "Have you had anything to drink?" And he would go, "No." And I would believe him. And I would open the door, and I would let him in. Now, I did not give him a key. So he would come in. I would have locked all the children back in the bedroom wing, and so we could have this cocktail party. And I would have hors d'oeuvres, and I would tell him all the stories that I'd collected. I was like his cheerleader. I'd just tell him this and tell him that. I had to talk really fast. If you think I talk fast now, you should have seen me then. I mean, I had to talk really fast because he'd start going to sleep right in front of me. His eyes would close. And so I would be telling him all the funny things that had happened at school and talking really fast, and I would hand him this drink, and he would drink about half of it, and then he would pass out on the couch. And I would lift him up like this, and I'd say, "You can have another drink." And he would go, "Oh," Now, while he was drinking the second drink, I would run and I would grab the children. And I would say, out for dinner, or they would be beating on the door. I would put the dinner out, and he would come in. We ate very fast. My kids would just grab things off of the plate because they didn't know how fast the food was going to be there. Because the minute Buddy Ross said, "Oh, I'm tired, I think I'll go to bed," I would just jerk everything off of the table and start running for the kitchen. And the kids maybe hadn't gotten the meat yet. And so everybody was grabbing stuff, As I was running to the kitchen, I'd say, "Everybody back to the rooms, time for bed, time to go to sleep, time to study," and they'd say, "The light is still light," Well, I had to do everything really fast. And so I threw everything in the dishwasher, and I would start back across the den, and I would be unbuttoning my blouse because I had to get to bed fast for sex. Fast. And so I would go running into the bedroom. I mean, I'd studied forever. And I'd run into the bedroom, and there he would be, unconscious. And I would lift him up and say, "Do you want sex?" And he'd go, "No." One time when I was speaking, this lady came up and said, "You're the only nymphomaniac I have ever heard speak." Now, I want to tell you, I was not at all. What I was, sex was right in there with a tunnel of fudge cake or whatever else he wanted. He'd say, "No sex." I'd say, "Well, how about a fried chicken?" Or, to keep him awake and entertained. That was my mission at that time. Mainly just awake. Buddy was a very sweet, passive, couch potato type drunk. I spoke to him like this for years. I almost had a crick in my neck. I'd lift his head up, and say, "They've cut the water off," and he'd say, "That's nice," and he would drift back out, into another world. I was talking another time in Waco, and this man from California on the front row who was speaking later, I heard him say, "I'd have killed that bitch." Well, we, toward the end of the drinking, I had decided, and this is so serious to me, it was so serious at the time, and I want you to understand, I understand that mental retardation is a very serious thing, and I'm not making fun of it, but what I want you to understand is that I had decided that Buddy Ross was becoming mentally retarded, and that was more palpable to me than alcoholism, I think, somewhere in, anything except the real thing. My denial was complete. And they had given me a list of questions at school to look over your classes at the first of the year and see if there was a problem with any of the kids. And so there was a little test you took for them, and I'm good at taking tests for other people, and so I immediately took that mental retardation test for Buddy, and he failed all 20 questions. It was, his eyes did not focus well. He had selective hearing. All of this sort of thing. And I was then devastated because now I really had to hide the fact not only did he not have a job, but he was becoming mentally retarded. And so I started talking to him very slowly and telling him to watch my lips and making him repeat after me the things that I said and giving him little notes that he put in his pocket so he could remember what I had told him to do. And so anyway, we were going through this, but we were invited to a wedding, and suddenly I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have to go out in public, and somebody's going to notice that he's mentally retarded, and so I decided that I would. I had decided that I suddenly realized I didn't have my stage prop that I had been so kindly given. I had decided that I would be able to cope, and so I told him, I said, Buddy, we're going to this wedding reception. And I have come up with a way that you can go to the party. Now, you say that you get too much to drink and you don't know what you're doing. But I have come up with the idea, I am going to give you 3 peanuts. And I want you to put these peanuts in your right-hand pocket. And each time you have a drink, transfer the peanut to your left-hand pocket. When you do not have any more peanuts in your right-hand pocket, you have had enough to drink. Well, he repeated it all back to me, all right, I dressed him, I zipped him, I took him, and I put my arm around him and walked in, but I had to go to the bathroom about an hour in, and I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, he had had too much to drink, and I could not believe it. So I went over to him and I put my arm around him and I felt down in his right-hand pocket and there were no peanuts. Now he was talking to another man. And I went around to the other side and I put my arm around and felt for his peanuts. And they were not there. Now the man was looking at me like something was terribly wrong with me. And Buddy was just talking away, and I was feeling for his peanuts. They were not there. He had eaten them. Cunning, baffling, and powerful. Cheryl gave me 3 peanuts as I walked up to the stand, so that was what I was laughing at. Oh, we were so sick. I want to tell you, it was awful when I look back on it. The Christmas before we got to you, Buddy Ross had a very good friend in school, and he came to visit, and we had probably the worst thing that had happened to us up until. I guess everything was terrible, but this was the thing that stands out in my mind. I had gone down because I was going to have the perfect Christmas, and I had a perfect Christmas tree. I had perfectly wrapped presents. I had it perfectly decorated, and God forbid anybody touch it or come near it, mainly the children, and they had been told this because we were going to have this wonderful Christmas. And so I had 2 Siamese cats, and I had seen in the paper where they had red cat collars with holly hanging off of them. And now, if you know anything about cats, they don't like things like that. But, it didn't matter to me what anybody liked. We were going to have the perfect Christmas. So I went down to this place to buy these cat collars. And when I came home, I was at the babbling stage, and I had seen, and I saw this, and I saw that, and I was telling Buddy all this. I don't remember making the statement that triggered the whole thing, because I saw a bunch of things. I saw dogs, and I saw goldfish. I also saw rats. Japanese hooded rats, black and white to the tail. Now, I don't remember telling him that I saw the rats. I've never even had a gerbil. But anyway, I tell him these little things, and I don't know what gets through this, I don't even know he's listening to me. But Christmas Eve, he staggers through the door, and he has a bird cage with 2 Japanese hooded rats in it, a male and a female. Now, this perfect Christmas, these cats go crazy. They just go nuts. They think he has brought their Christmas present home. And we had to put it way up on a bookcase. The children were awed, particularly because I don't know that anybody in the audience probably has ever had rats voluntarily. But they're very sweet. They're very sweet. And they nuzzle each other, and they make love a lot. And they have a lot of babies. And they have babies about every 27 days. And you have 7. 4 males, 3 females. Our children immediately named them, and became really into it. I flushed the first flock down the John, and I was caught, and the kids were saying, she's killed Harry and John and mine. They wouldn't let me go to the bathroom by myself. And we bought habitails, which are little exercise rooms so the rats can stay healthy, and long yellow tubes to connect the exercise rooms to the dining halls. And the children put these through 2 bedrooms, and I never did count, but they say we got up to about 186 rats. They were all upstairs. Now I had to hide the drinking, the mental retardation, and the rats. And I was dragging home 50 pounds of rat food when my neighbors were, exterminating. And we would have rat breakouts. The cats would, hit over the dining hall. And, it was bizarre. Well, into this came Buddy's roommate, functional with 2 little children. He has not seen us since the University of Texas in our salad days. And so, Buddy, we're there, and I'm having a cocktail party. I know how to mix drinks. I know how to do the whole thing, and I'm laughing, and I have my little bottoms-up apron on, and things are going well, and Buddy is standing there, and he looks happy, and he doesn't say very much by now. He just is there, and just the husband, I think. He doesn't talk a lot, and he looked happy. I now know he was miserable, but he smiled a lot. And so he was smiling, and suddenly he opened his mouth. He hadn't talked in a long time. See, I did all the talking. And he looked at the little girl and said, Elizabeth, would you like to go upstairs and see our rats? Well, I wasn't about to let him go upstairs and show the rats. So I said, honey, why don't you run upstairs and bring down Edith? They were named for relatives. And so he brought down Edith, and she was a great big mother rat, and she hung up on his shoulder. And suddenly he was showing her to Elizabeth, and Edith started having babies. And she had 3 little babies, and they hang on little strings. And we were all just standing there like this. It was just like my worst nightmare had come true. Because suddenly, he said later, he didn't know what to do, and he took his thumb and started trying to put them back where they were coming from. And I was sitting there with this vision that these little rats were saying, hold your breath, we're going back. In April of 1976, Buddy had that moment of clarity, which I thought Tom described so well, and the other night, and it was almost the same thing. It was, if you don't sober up, you will lose your life, you will lose your family, and then you will lose your life. And I tell that, although it is his story, because, you see, everything I've ever done in our relationship was a reaction to what he did. I never did do anything on my own. I didn't go, take a perfectly normal person and start zipping him up and being cruel. Mine was all a reaction to him. And so he sobered up, and that impacted my life in this way. I had heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. He thinks I hated it. I didn't. I was glad he had someplace to back out to and go all day, every day, and then I didn't have to send him to the public library. It was okay with me. And but I didn't. I told him, I said, now, Buddy, if there is something down there called alcoholeps, do not tell me about it, because I said, I have been all of those things. I have been a Rotarian, I have done this, I have done that, I have gotten a master's degree in the Tang Dynasty of 7th century China, I am head of the English department, I am head of this, I am head of that, and I was telling him, because I was a runner, I was head of everything out there. I was head of the women in the Republican Party, I was head of all the Episcopal women in the Dallas-Fort Worth Diocese. I didn't know how to pray or anything, but that didn't matter, I was just head of it. Had this vague idea of a God out there. Anyway, so I said, if there's an alcoholic, don't tell me about it, and he didn't. So he went to AA, but he had called the doctor after this experience and said, I want to sober up. The doctor said, I can put you in the hospital and sober you up. And he said, well, there's just one problem, my wife. And he said, your wife doesn't want you to be sober? He said, no, you don't understand. My wife does not think I'm an alcoholic, hates that word, because I had spent a lot of time telling him he was not an alcoholic. He had drifted by AA. They had told him, if you're an alcoholic, you can't control your drinking, so he would mix a drink, and when I would find him, I'd say, what in the hell do you think you're doing? And he'd say, I'm mixing a drink. I'm a hopeless alcoholic. And then I would scream, you are not an alcoholic, and we would go through this long thing. So he told the doctor, she won't let me go on an alcoholic ward. She'll come up to the hospital and take me out, and I wouldn't. He was right. Well, anyway, they put him on the chest surgery floor, and so that no one would know he was an alcoholic. And so the doctor called me at school and told me, and I had no coping system. I had never told a soul there was a problem in our household. Hadn't told our priest. I hadn't told my parents. I hadn't told anybody. I had hidden everything all these years. The fact this doctor believed him was a shock to me, and I thought he had hoodwinked the doctor So I raced to the hospital. I was in a rage, and I ran up the stairs, and I kicked the door open. It was on the 7th floor. That's 14 flights of stairs. Hadn't even lost my breath. I could have flown, It wouldn't have made any difference. I had that kind of power before I got to Al-Anon. And so I kicked the door open, and I said, "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" And he jerked the cover up like this. He said, "Beverly, I'm a hopeless alcoholic. I'm trying to get sober." And I screamed, "You are not an alcoholic!" I said, "They've got you here on the chest surgery floor, and somebody's going to come down this hall, and they're going to look in here, and you don't have any kind of wound or any tubes coming out of you like that man." There was a man between Buddy and me who had gone into terror. He was hooked up to things, and he was going, looking at me. People had come out in the hall to see what was happening, and I was screaming, "You're not an alcoholic." But he put that sheet up, and he hung in there. He didn't let me get him out of there. And he sobered up, and he went to AA, and from that day to this, he has never had another drink. Now, 2 months in, his liver collapsed, and the doctor called me and said, "We have raced Buddy to the hospital. He is dying of cirrhosis of the liver, and his liver is not functioning, and we don't know whether it will or not." And I did not have a coping system. I hadn't been to Alcolettes. I didn't know anything about anybody. I didn't know anybody in AA. So I did what I'd always done, which is what we do. I jumped in the car. I raced back to the hospital. I ran up the stairs, and I kicked the door open, and I said, "You will not die of cirrhosis of the liver. I will think of something else." And he was yellow as a sheet, and he said, "Whatever you want me to die of, I'll die of." The AAs came to call on him, and I thought all I'd understood was Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. And so when they would walk in with this book under their arm, I would do this and walk out, because I didn't think I was supposed to look them in the face, or they wouldn't be anonymous, and they thought I was very odd. He came home from the hospital, and his life had changed, because he had faced, eternity. And he started reading everything AA had, and he was praying, and he had meditation time about an hour in the morning, and I thought he had become the most spiritual person I'd ever seen in my life. I didn't know he was sicker than rain, but anyway, I just was awestruck, about what was going on, and I started reading the books with him, and I corrected all the big book, all the split infinities, every single sentence that was not correct, and I told him, you can send this off when they redo the next thing, they will have it all right. And there are a lot of things in there, and I've heard it said, and it was true, it's not if you want what we've got, it's if you want what we have, and I pointed all these little tips out to him, which it didn't matter, Well, anyway, one Sunday, I wanted him to go to church with me, and he wouldn't go, and he said, I have found the God of my understanding at Alcoholics Anonymous, and I thought that was the most blasphemous thing I had ever heard. And it made me so enraged, I jerked up a notebook, and I said, "All right, you have had it. I am going to go with you this morning, and I am going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I am going to look every one of those people in the face, and I'm going to put their names in this book, and they are not going to be anonymous anymore." And he said, "All right." And he let me go. Now, I want to tell you, I walked in, and there you were. There you were. You were there. And you were laughing, and you were having a wonderful time, and you were hugging, and there was an aura about it that I cannot tell you, for somebody like me, what it was like. It was like that the magnet was the laughter, and the message was the love. And it was the most incredible experience. I dropped that notebook. My Lord, here was a whole room of alcoholics. I just hugged them and kissed them and loved them. I wanted to take them all home with me so I could take care of them, like I had buddies. The people that I thought were the most gorgeous were the alcoholic women, and they were just beautiful, and I wanted to be one. And I told them I could quote the big book, the only, requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. And I would say, I'd have no desire to drink anymore. And so they would question me about my drinking, and they said, "Honey, I don't think, this is not for you. This is not for you." And I said, I just really got upset about it. And they said, "No, you're to go with them." And I said, "Who are them?" Now, today it is very embarrassing to be here at the Gopher State as an Al-Anon speaker and tell you what I thought I saw when I looked at them. I thought this is the way they were looking. And I think they were, because I'd been around quite a bit by now. They'd heard about me a lot. And so I don't think they wanted me to tell you the truth. I think they were pushing me toward the alcoholic women. But I looked at him and I said, well, I'm not joining. I thought, oh my God, it's the alkalettes, you see. And so I said, well, I am not joining them. So I went to open AA meetings and I loved it. Oh, Lord, I loved it. I just OD'd on open AA meetings, always in the front row, just loving them. They were just, oh, it was marvelous. Well, anyway, I was there every time the doors opened, but I never looked at them. I never spoke to them. I avoided them. And so anyway, Buddy had started, he had always done a lot of electronic stuff, and he had started taping some local conventions, and he was going to an AA convention in Longview, Texas, the one I told you that Bob spoke at and David A. And so he asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, I will go. But I said, Buddy, I am not an alcoholic. I have never been an I'm not an Al-Anon, excuse me. I've never been an Al-Anon. I never intend to be an Al-Anon. I'm not going to have Al-Anon on my badge. And he said, all right, and they took me down there, and sure enough, they had red badges for the alcoholics, blue badges for the Al-Anons, and they made me a white badge that said visitor. And at that convention, I sat on the second row where the lady in navy and white is, and that's a really important seat to me, because while I was sitting there, I heard my first Al-Anon speaker on the second day, and it was Gracie A. from Dallas, and I can't tell you what happened to me, because I had a spiritual experience. It was like every feeling she had had, I had had. Every way she had felt. I had not cried in 11 years, and the tears just started streaming down my cheeks. The whole front of my dress was wet. At the end of her talk, if she had said, come up and get dipped, I would have done that. If she had said, come up and slit your wrist and bleed with us, I would have done that. I had joined Al-Anon. No wonder we looked like this. We had lived with you. You know, and they say, this is the Al-Anon salute, and I did a lot of that. I went back to Fort Worth, Texas. I roared through the coffee room where all of my AA friends were, and I said, hello. And they said, my God, what happened to her? And they said, she joined Al-Anon. Well, I joined Al-Anon, and I read everything that they published and had wonderful literature, and if you could get it from the books, I'd have gotten it, but they said you need a sponsor, and I got one, and she told me I needed to do the steps, and I looked at her, and I'd seen Buddy do the steps, and I said, I want to tell you something, Eloise. You have not lived in Fort Worth very long, but if you had, you would know I have a wonderful personality. And I'm afraid to do 4 and 5 because you might change my personality, and I know if you'd lived here longer, you would know that you wouldn't want to change my personality. And she looked at me and said, and I used to say lied, and they did, but actually what happened was it changed my character, and it changed my value system, and it changed my life. And everything that I have today, every contact, every relationship, financially, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, everything I am, I owe to the Al-Anon program. It impacted my life in ways that are just awesome to me even today. I really joined Al-Anon, and I did the steps. And after I had been in Al-Anon a little while, I realized, we have these spiritual awakenings, and one that I had was that I realized I had not handled suicide well. And because when somebody died, I never wrote a note, I never went to see them if that was the cause of the death. And I realized that suddenly that I had not dealt with something in my past, which was the fact that Buddy's mother was my very best friend. She and I I just adored her. She had the most precious, adorable personality in the world, very much what her son has. And I just adored her. And I really now know that she was an untreated Al-Anon. And I would let her talk about everything in the world. I saw her every day. We just loved each other. But I would never let her talk about anything that got near the fact there was something wrong in our household. And both of her children were alcoholics, and as things got worse and worse, one day this woman I love more than anybody in the world took a knife and cut her throat. And there was a lot of blood, and we got there before the ambulance, and I remember taking Buddy's hand and saying, it's not your fault. It is not your fault. Now, I'll tell you whose fault I thought it was. I thought it was mine. And I coped, and I did all the things, but I carried that a long time into Al-Anon. And by doing another 4th and 5th step on that, I was able to lose that burden of guilt, and to know today that she is all right, and she knows we're all right, and she is with us. And it is a beautiful thought to know that she can see the recovery in our life. And you gave that to me, and it's very precious. And in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about our dark past can be our greatest asset. And that is what happened with me, because today, when there's a suicide, I can be the first one there and say it's not your fault. And it's been a wonderful gift. The other gift was that shortly thereafter I realized there was something wrong in our marriage, and I prayed that in my meditation time that God would show me and make me the kind of wife that He wanted me to be. And several days later I said to Buddy, something is wrong in our marriage, and he said, yes, there is. I don't love you. I don't hate you. I just don't have any feeling for you at all. And I was devastated because we had been in the program about 2.5 years. I had, and it just looked like we had everything together, and we didn't. And what I now know is that Buddy didn't know how to love, and that he had no feelings. His feelings had died. But I took that as a complete rejection of me, and I had a total Al-Anon flip, and I went to the library, which was always my answer, and I said, I want all your books on divorce. I want how to divorce and get everything, how to divorce and be best friends, how to divorce and kill them. You know, they filled my little basket up. They knew me well, and I went home to divorce. And he was there, and he had told his sponsor this, and the sponsor told him, don't tell her, let God rebuild the marriage if it is to be. But I am glad it happened as it did, because we were able to share, and I wanted the divorce and he didn't, and he wanted to rebuild the marriage. And we had been standing all this time with the steps, and suddenly I realized here were these traditions, and he did. And he said, let's try to let God rebuild our marriage along the ideas of the traditions. So we took those traditions and we put them in our marriage. And we'd use things like principles above personalities, and that was wonderful. And there are no leaders, there are only trusted servants, and all those wonderful things that are there that work for the group, and they work for us. And today we do, once a year we'll go to a group in the Metroplex and do our traditions, and we do them for a month, and it's been very precious to us, and we have learned each time. The first thing we learned to do was get on our knees and put our arms around each other and pray for each other. And that was more intimate than sex. It was frightening. It was scary. But God did start rebuilding our marriage. And today I can tell you that we had a really sick marriage. And God allowed us to let that marriage die and build a new marriage. And we got to do that with each other. And it was very precious to me. Before I go any further, I do want Buddy to stand up, if he will, because I adore him and love him, and I want you all to see him too. I want to close with something that was very special to me that I found on an Al-Anon type retreat, and it was up at Mesilla Park in New Mexico at a monastery, and I picked a book up out of the library and I read a little statement, and it was just wonderful because it was me. And what it said was, when we reach it was from Thomas Aquinas, I believe, and it said, when we reach the day of judgment, we will never be asked what we read, but what we've done. And we will never be asked how well we talked, but how well we lived. And I want to thank each and every one of you for teaching me how to live. Thank you.